Henry must have looked at Catherine as a complete thorn in his side, especially since she was family. For nearly 5 centuries, the death of King Henry VIII has remained an enigma, shrouded in legend, rumor, and rotting flesh. Was England's most infamous monarch a power-mad tyrant, or was he something even more tragic, a man destroyed from the inside out by his own DNA? Nearly 500 years after his death, genetic evidence has finally uncovered the truth. And it is bad. Really bad. What scientists found lurking in his bloodline rewrites everything we thought we knew about this man who changed history forever. He wasn't just cruel, he was sick literally. His very body was at war with itself, eating away at his mind and destroying those very heirs he desperately wanted. The monster who ruled with paranoia and rage was, in reality, a man whose blood carried a ticking genetic time bomb. When Henry ascended the throne in 1509, England rejoiced. At just 17, he was everything that a Renaissance king should be: tall, athletic, handsome, and brilliant. Over 6 feet tall with fiery red hair and the confidence of youth, he seemed the very vision of royal perfection. He could fence and dance and hunt and debate theology. He was charismatic, musical, and fair-minded. The people adored him, Europe admired him. Here was England's golden prince, the promise of a new age. Yet, that same prince, 40 years later, was all but unrecognizable, bloated, brutal, and paranoid. Henry VIII died in 1547 weighing nearly 400 pounds, consumed by pain and ulcers and madness. His reign had been a trail of executed wives and fallen ministers and rivers of blood. Historians long blamed absolute power for corrupting him absolutely, while others whispered about syphilis or diabetes or gluttony. None could explain the complete change of his personality, the repeated miscarriages of his wives, and the chronic ulcers that would not heal. All of these symptoms begged for something much deeper, something hereditary. And now science has finally caught up with history. The turning point came in 2011, when a team led by bioarchaeologist Katrina Whitley and historian Kira Kramer presented a radical new theory. King Henry VIII had a rare blood type known as Cal-positive. About 9% of people of European extraction have it. To the Tudor world, it was an invisible curse; to modern medicine, a clear and deadly explanation for the king's personal tragedies. Here's how it works. If a Cal-positive father conceives a child with a Cal-negative mother, the first pregnancy might succeed. But during childbirth, small amounts of the baby's blood enter the mother's bloodstream. Her immune system, recognizing the Cal antigen as foreign, creates antibodies to destroy it. In every subsequent pregnancy, these antibodies attack any Cal-positive fetus, destroying its red blood cells and ultimately killing it. The pattern matches Henry's reproductive history with chilling precision. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first queen, suffered at least 6 failed pregnancies. A few babies were born alive but soon died. Only one, Mary, survived; the others perished late in pregnancy, typically in the final trimester when Cal antibodies are most destructive. The same tragedy occurred with Anne Boleyn. Her first child, Elizabeth, was born healthy, but her second and third pregnancies ended in miscarriage, including one only days after Henry's infamous jousting accident in 1536. To the people of Tudor England, these were acts of God. To us, they read like a genetic autopsy. Every loss, every coffin built for a royal infant, was the consequence of Henry's own blood. Imagine what that did to him, a man told since childhood that he was chosen by God, watching his lineage crumble. Each stillbirth became an accusation from heaven. He began to believe he was cursed. That belief shaped every decision he made: the split from Rome, the creation of the Church of England, and the execution of his wives, all rooted in the desperation for a male heir his own DNA would never allow him to have. But the curse did not stop there. The Cal-positive gene explained the dead children but not the madness. For that, scientists turned to another rare disorder that may have destroyed Henry's brain, MLOU syndrome, a genetic disease carried on the X chromosome. It attacks body and mind, typically appearing in men around age 40. Before that age, its victims are healthy, then slowly everything begins to unravel: muscle weakness, neurological decline, mood swings, paranoia, and erratic decision-making. Then disaster struck in 1536, when Henry was 44. During a jousting tournament at Greenwich Palace, his horse fell and crushed him beneath 200 pounds of armor. He was unconscious for hours, perhaps suffering a traumatic brain injury. When he awoke, he would never be the same. The courtiers noticed the change almost immediately. The king, who once wrote love songs and played the lute, now raged at servants for imagined slights. The man who charmed his court with laughter now ruled through fear. His temper turned volcanic, his suspicion unrelenting. He turned on trusted advisers and executed friends. Anne Boleyn, whom he'd once risked his kingdom to marry, was accused of adultery, incest, and witchcraft. Whether or not those charges were true, his mind was already slipping into darkness. But if Unsolved syndrome was the real culprit, then that accident didn't cause his decline, it accelerated it. Trauma may have triggered symptoms already waiting in his genes. What followed was a reign of paranoia and pain. By the late 1530s, the court was suffocating under the weight of Henry's moods. Nobody was safe, ministers fell like wives. Thomas More was executed for refusing to accept Henry as head of the church, and Thomas Cromwell, architect of the Reformation, met the same fate. The language of politics became fear, and England learned to bow not only to its king but also to his insanity. As his mind corroded, Henry's body collapsed in slow motion. The jousting accident left unhealed leg wounds that haunted him for life. The ulcers were huge, deep, and infected. Contemporary accounts describe them oozing pus, the stench filling rooms. Courtiers claimed they could smell the king before seeing him. The treatments were medieval torture. Physicians would lance and drain the wounds, pack them with herbs, and even cauterize them with red-hot irons. Henry screamed as his flesh burned, only for the ulcers to return weeks later. His physicians didn't understand circulation or bacteria, they thought bad humors caused the rot. In truth, Unsolved syndrome and obesity had ruined his blood flow, and his legs could no longer heal themselves. The pain was relentless. Sleep became difficult, exercise became impossible, and so he began to eat. Henry's appetite, always legendary, became monstrous. He devoured enormous feasts: venison, swan, pies, custards, ale, and wine. The more he ate, the more he suffered. His weight ballooned to nearly 400 pounds, and his heart labored to sustain his massive frame. He developed gout, arthritis, and perhaps diabetes. The man who once danced until dawn could barely walk. Visitors described him being carried in mechanical chairs. His once sharp features swelled beyond recognition, his breathing was heavy, wheezing, and labored, and he slept sitting up to keep from suffocating. Each day was a battle against his own body, and his courtiers whispered that the king was dying by inches. And yet his mind continued its descent. The Unsolved syndrome attacked not only his muscles but his neurons. He became unpredictable, alternately generous and cruel, charming and terrifying. The disease eroded his empathy and deepened his paranoia. It wasn't just madness, it was degeneration. To understand how this genetic nightmare began, scientists traced Henry's ancestry, and the trail led back to Jacquetta of Luxembourg, his maternal great-grandmother. Known for her beauty and rumored sorcery, Jacquetta passed down something far more potent than magic: a defective gene. Her descendants, including Henry, carried the same pattern of reproductive tragedy. The men struggled to produce heirs, the women thrived, and the inheritance of the Cal antigen perfectly matched her bloodline. What Tudor courtiers called a curse was in fact inheritance, a molecular legacy stretching back generations, waiting to find its ultimate victim on the throne of England. For centuries, Other theories tried to explain Henry's transformation. Syphilis was a favorite among Victorian doctors. It fit the narrative of a lustful king punished for sin. But syphilis leaves unmistakable neurological scars, none of which match Henry's symptoms. Others suggested Cushing's syndrome caused by excess cortisol or type 2 diabetes, but those conditions alone couldn't explain the reproductive disasters or the precise timing of his mental collapse. Only the Cal-positive blood type and Loud syndrome theory tie everything together: the miscarriages, the ulcers, the paranoia, and the monstrous obesity. It's the only hypothesis that makes sense across medicine, history, and psychology, and it paints a devastating picture. Henry VIII was not just a tyrant, he was the victim of a genetic ambush. His DNA programmed him to destroy his heirs, his sanity, and his legacy. By 1546, the king was barely human. His legs were so swollen that he had to be lifted by pulleys, his ulcers leaked constantly, and his moods were violent and despairing. Servants feared to wake him lest they be executed for disturbing his rest. He alternated between prayers and curses, believing he was haunted by the ghosts of his wives. In January 1547, infections set in for the final time, fever raged through his massive body, and his organs failed one by one. Modern doctors believe sepsis from the leg ulcers and congestive heart failure killed him. At 55 years old, the once golden Prince of England was gone. The courtiers dared not speak of what his deathbed must have looked like: a king swollen beyond recognition, his body bursting with infection. Even in death, he remained a symbol of power, buried with pomp in St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, but his greatest secret, the truth written in his DNA, went with him to the grave. Until now, if modern scientists could test his remains, they might find the Cal-positive antigen and the MLOUD mutation, the invisible fingerprints of a biological tragedy. But even without his bones, the evidence is overwhelming: the reproductive records, the symptoms, the behavioral shifts all line up perfectly with what we now know about these rare genetic conditions, and that changes everything. History has long judged Henry VIII as a monster, a murderer of wives, a gluttonous tyrant, but the DNA evidence complicates that story. What if the monster wasn't made by choice, but by biology? What if the mind that sent Anne Boleyn to her death was already being eaten away by disease? That doesn't absolve him. His victims remain dead, his decisions remain catastrophic, but it reframes the man. He wasn't just evil, he was doomed. The true horror of Henry VIII's life isn't the beheadings or betrayals, it's that he never knew why he was losing his mind, his heirs, and his body. He thought he was cursed by God. In truth, he was cursed by genetics. His bloodline carried the seeds of its own destruction, and it played out in front of the world. Every miscarriage, every execution, every act of madness was part of a pattern written in his cells before he was born. The king who defied the Pope, who split his nation in two, who married 6 women and murdered 2 of them, was fighting an invisible war against his own body and losing. When you strip away the myth, what's left is a man at war with his own blood, a man who didn't understand why his body was rotting, why his mind was slipping, and why God seemed to hate him. The tragedy of Henry VIII isn't just that he became a monster, it's that he never had a chance not to. 5 centuries later, modern science has done what Tudor medicine could not: it's peered inside the body of a king and found the truth that history missed, the truth that every tyrant's rage may not come from power alone but from pain, and that sometimes the worst monsters are made by their own blood. So when you look at the portrait of Henry VIII, the broad chest, the piercing eyes, the glimmer of arrogance, remember what's hidden behind that gaze: not just cruelty, but suffering; not just vanity, but disease. And as DNA technology continues to advance, who knows what other royal secrets lie waiting in the blood of the past. After nearly 500 years, the truth about King Henry VIII's death has finally emerged, and it's bad, worse than we ever imagined, because it means the rise and fall of England's most infamous king was written in his DNA from the very beginning. What do you think? If scientists could prove beyond doubt that Henry's mind was destroyed by genetic disease, would it change how we remember him? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the answers to history's darkest mysteries aren't found in the crown but in the blood that wore it. But the story doesn't end with Henry's deathbed. In many ways, it begins there. For centuries, the Tudor bloodline was thought to have ended with Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, yet modern genealogists have traced distant threads of Henry's lineage through collateral branches of his family, the Nevilles, the Howards, and others whose descendants still live quietly across Britain and Europe today. If the Cal antigen and the MLOUD mutation truly plagued Henry's body, then fragments of that genetic code may still be out there, pulsing silently in modern veins.